Have the new US tariffs breached international law? In this video, I will explore what the United States president announced and why, who will be most impacted, and most importantly, whether these US tariffs are legal under international trade rules. Remember, if you like this content, please subscribe and follow for more. What has the US president announced? To understand the legal debate on the legality of these US tariffs, let me first explain exactly what the US has done. On the 2nd of April 2025, the United States President Donald Trump announced a sweeping tariff package under what he called a Declaration of Economic Independence. This involved a 10% base tariff on all imports into the United States, regardless of origin, and higher tariffs dubbed reciprocal tariffs for specific countries that the US accuses of unfair trade practices. These measures are to take effect in stages, with the most aggressive tariffs beginning on the 9th of April. What does the US, though, mean by reciprocal? The idea of reciprocal tariffs is central to the United States justification. Essentially, Washington argues that many countries impose higher tariffs on US goods than the US does on theirs. So in response, the US is now mirroring or reciprocating those higher rates. From the US perspective, this is about leveling the playing field, a move they claim is long overdue. But critics argue this isn't reciprocity, that there is no logic in the US tariffs, especially when they have included uninhabited islands, such as the Heard and McDonald Islands, and on countries with which the US runs a surplus, such as the United Kingdom. And the maths in calculating the US tariffs for each country for some makes no sense. The Trump administration ended up using a simple calculation. Each country's US trade deficit divided by its exports to the United States. The final reciprocal tariff was then divided by 2 with a minimum of 10%. That's why many are so shocked by the US tariffs, but also see that this is part of US repositioning itself in the world. So which countries are targeted and by how much? Some countries are hit the hardest with US tariffs, over 180 of them. In addition to the blanket 10% tariffs on all imports, certain countries have been singled out. So for example, Vietnam, 46%, China, 34%, Panama, 30%, Egypt, 25%, Jordan, 22%, Denmark, 18%, Greenland, 15%, the European Union, 20%, Israel, 17%, and then the United Kingdom with 10% tariffs. And it should not be forgotten that some of these countries have already been subject to early US tariffs, like China, and there is a specific 25% tariff imposed on all automobile imports, affecting major car exporting countries like Germany, Japan, and South Korea. There was an immediate economic fallout, the corporate blowback. The market reacted instantly. Big name countries, particularly those reliant on global supply chains, were all hit hard. Apple lost over $311 billion in market value as its shares dropped over 9%. That might be because Apple relies on Chinese assembly plants. Nike, with a supply base heavily in Asia, fell more than 14%. Amazon, which relies on international logistics and sourcing, lost 9%. Tesla dropped over 5.5%, despite being a US-based company, due to international components used in its vehicles. And General Motors and Ford, both of which manufacture components and vehicles in Mexico and Canada, warned of increased vehicle costs. What is clear here is that many US companies have global production networks. When tariffs hit imports, they hit US firms too. So what does this mean for consumers and workers? The cost won't stop at companies. You and I, consumers, will feel it too, whether you live in the US or not. Prices may rise for imported goods like smartphones, clothing, cars, and groceries. Job losses may occur in industries that rely on parts from abroad, especially manufacturing and retail. But on the flip side, some US-based producers might benefit from reduced competition, potentially lowering prices in sectors like steel or aluminium. And some products in other countries might see a reduction in price as countries divert goods and products away from the US. But history shows us that this is not going to be easy on any country and anyone, especially what seems to be the beginning of a trade war. So how have other countries responded? Reactions from the international community have varied. The EU have called these tariffs unjustified and is preparing to file a complaint with the WTO. China condemned the actions and is considering retaliatory tariffs. The UK, caught in a political dilemma, is seeking negotiations with the US to reduce the impact. So we're potentially heading towards a new era of trade conflict unless cooler heads prevail. But are these US tariffs legal under international law? Let me now turn to this core question. Do these tariffs breach international trade law? Now, under the rules of the World Trade Organization, WTO, specifically the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade 1994, GATT 1994, member countries are bound by certain principles designed to ensure fairness and predictability in global trade. There are at least two provisions that are especially relevant here. One, the most favored nation treatment, MFN, Article 1, GATT 1994. This clause requires that any advantage a WTO member gives to one country must be extended to all other WTO members. With respect to customs duties and charges to any kind imposed on or in connection with importation, any advantage, favour, privilege or immunity granted by any contracting party to any product originating in or destined for any other country shall be accorded to all other contracting parties. Implications mean by applying higher tariffs to selected countries like China, Vietnam or Jordan, while applying lower or no tariffs to others, e.g. US allies or FTA partners, the US may be violating the MFN principle unless WTO exceptions apply. The second provision that might apply in this case is tariff binding schedules of concession, Article 2 of GATT 1994. Each WTO member has a schedule of maximum tariff bindings that it has agreed not to exceed. If a country unilaterally raises its tariffs above these bound rates, it violates these obligations. The products described in Part 1 of the schedule shall be exempt from ordinary customs duties in excess of those set forth and provided therein. The implications are these. If these newly announced tariffs exceed the US WTO bound rates, and they are likely to do so, they would be in direct breach of Article 2. Now, there's precedents where there's WTO rulings against the United States. This isn't the first time the United States has tested the limits of these rules. In the United States, Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminium cases, in this case, the WTO Dispute Resolution Panel, deciding on an appeal from China and other countries, ruled that the 25% steel tariff and 10% aluminium tariff did not merit the national security exemption under which they were implemented. In quotes, the panel finds that the United States has not demonstrated that its measures were taken in times of war or other emergency in international relations, according to the report summary. So are the new tariffs legal under international law? Unless the United States can justify them under a narrow WTO exception, such as Article 11 on national security, or by renegotiating its commitments, these tariffs are likely to breach Article 1 and Article 2. Let me also turn to consider this point. Are these tariffs geopolitical tools? Some argue that the United States is looking inwards, moving away from being the world player. But is that correct? The United States has also territorial ambitions. President Trump has floated the idea of acquiring Greenland, expressed strategic interest in Panama Canal, and linked economic pressures to influence countries like Jordan and Egypt to help make Gaza the Riviera of the Middle East. Using tariffs to push diplomatic or territorial goals could amount to economic coercion, a practice that is increasingly under scrutiny and potentially a violation of international law under the principle of non-intervention. So what can countries do? If other nations believe the United States is breaching WTO rules, they can file a dispute complaint at the WTO dispute settlement body, seek retaliatory tariffs legally approved by the WTO, form alliances or trade blocs to counter the United States pressure, and explore remedies in international courts arguing that economic coercion violates international norms. But the United States is a superpower, super consumer power, and super military power. It has historically dismissed WTO rulings it disagrees with. So enforcement becomes largely meaningless and more about a global consensus and diplomatic pressure than legal remedy alone to resolve this issue. In my opinion, these US tariffs are more than just a radical shift in US economic policy to protect its workers and jobs, which it has every right to do so. It's also testing each nation's economic resilience in the new era. But it also seems that this is a prelude to an opening strategy to meet new US global ambitions. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Is the United States right to impose tariffs? Should countries retaliate? Will the WTO step in? Is this the start of a global trade war and a prelude to new US global ambitions? Feel free to comment. Don't forget to subscribe and follow for more. And thank you for watching.